It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Today we have Vincent Palamara. He's got a brand new book, JFK from Parkland to Bethesda, the Ultimate Kennedy Assassination Compendium, which is supposed to be like a whole big compilation of all the different JFK facts and figures and documents and all that stuff. Which Vince, how big is this book? It must be like a truckload to have everything JFK in it.
Yeah, actually, it focuses on the medical evidence, so it definitely brings in about the magic bullet by default and various areas about like the smell of gunpowder in Dealey Plaza and the people that saw the smoke and other, very important, albeit peripheral matters. But it's mainly on the medical evidence. But what it entails, it's the first time it's ever been done. That's when people think, 50 years later, what can be done new in this case? Well, it compiles every single statement the Parkland doctors and nurses and other people from that end of the line saw and heard, everything they ever said in chronological order, coupled with the people of Bethesda in Maryland where the autopsy was done and what they said. Because what I found through the years is there's a lot of important books in the medical evidence, but they're very frustrating. They'll make little blanket statements, a little hyperbole. They'll say, 20 doctors and nurses said the back of the president's head was gone, indicating the shots came from the front. And they only, have a few examples. They move on to something else. And I was like, boy, to really strengthen the case, it'd be really good from a lawyer's standpoint, historian standpoint, to get every statement known to mankind and even do some original research, which I did. I ended up contacting a lot of these people, including one major coup, one doctor that was never contacted by anybody else before. I'll get to that in a second. So again, what it does is it gives the reader, the interested person, whatnot, an opportunity to go, every statement Dr. Ken Clark ever said about the wounds, I want to see that now for the first time you can, as opposed to these blanket statements in books that are very frustrating. They're tantalizing but frustrating because they don't go into enough detail, in my opinion. This is the first time you get the details. It's everything with the kitchen sink when it comes to the medical evidence. But to go back to your first part of your question, yeah, it does by default get into other areas of the case, but it doesn't get into like Cuba, the mafia, all that stuff. That's for other people. I wanted to really stick with the hard medical evidence because, in my opinion, the medical evidence is the most important aspect of the case, and it's also the most confusing. So this is like a GPS, a roadmap through all that. Yeah.
You know what? That's great, and that's perfect for my audience too, because the people listen to this show. They love to see that the original documents, the witness statements. They want all the research. They want all the meat.
You'll get it. It's all meat there. It's not. In fact, the second book, the first book, has a decent amount of narrative by myself. This book is almost exclusively void of narrative. It's literally a reference book. And I go to great pains to tell people it's a reference book. It's kind of the equivalent of an encyclopedia, a dictionary. It's not something you take to the beach, but it's very important because getting rid of all that narrative is good because you get just the meat and potatoes. You don't get 200 pages of yada, 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 reminiscent about what I think about the case and my own spin on things. There's no spin. It's literally what all these doctors and nurses and important people saw, thought, heard, and put down for history. And again, it's all in one place. So it really strengthens the case of conspiracy because now you have specific names in chronological order of everybody that said everything and some very more important corroborating details. One thing I'll say is, like I mentioned earlier, his name is Dr. William Zedlitz. And his name was mentioned briefly during the Warren Commission hearings. I believe it was Dr. White, Martin White, who mentioned him in passing. And I don't know if it was intentional error or whatnot, but his name was misspelled. They put an extra E in there. So all these years, for whatever reason, no one ever contacted the guy. He was never interviewed for any book, private research, or nothing. And just by happenstance, in 1998, way back when, 18 years ago, I ran across a William Zedlitz online, a little country doctor in Texas. I wonder if this is that guy. And I sent him a letter, and he basically confirmed, no one's ever contacted me before. And it's in the book, but basically he corroborates the case for conspiracy. He says the back of the president's head was gone. The throat wound appeared to be an entrance wound. He's very matter of fact about it. And obviously, a guy was never looking for money or fame. This guy was never contacted by anybody, has never done anything with it since, pretty much. He just basically been kept to his own, self out there. That's another thing, too. The vast majority of these people, in fact, I'd really want to say 99% of them, have never looked for a quick buck, and they're not doing anything there. They've been just been doctors all these many decades, and it's only because of people like me and other people have contacted them that begrudgingly or whatnot, they've released their information. But a lot of times they're just continuing on their lives, saving people's lives, caring for people. It just happened to be in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time, depending on your perspective on things. That horrible day in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963, and obviously later that night at Bethesda, Maryland. So it's really good to have that all together. So that's the second book. The first book's on the Secret Service, and we can get into the third book too, but just to let everybody know. Yeah.
All right, tell you what, before we get into that, why don't you tell us about Vince Palamara? Palamara. Palamara. Tell us who Palamara is too, while you're at it. But Vince Palamara, tell us about yourself.
Okay, well, a lot of people say I don't look it, but I'm 49 going on 50, which actually in some respects is a young one in this case. And to make a long story very short for your listeners, basically my interest in this case began, believe it or not, when I was age 12, which takes us to 1978. This is a short story. This is not a big, long harangue, but it's important to show the sequence of events. Yeah, when I was 12 years old, it was the Haas Select Committee. It was the reinvestigation of the JFK assassination. And, the Warren Commission was the first one that found Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. There was no conspiracy. Well, the second one found there was a probable conspiracy, sort of hinted about the mafia, but very frustratingly kind of left it at that. But keep in mind, for a very impressionable young preteen that I was always one that stuck out in school that, wow, you really like to read. Wow, you're really into history. A lot of my peers weren't into that, especially at a young age. And I loved it. And my parents, who are still with us, doing really good, by the way, they were ardent Kennedy admirers. So everything came together like a synthesis. My mom and dad loved President Kennedy. Every once in a while, even at that early age, would mention him. I started to get into stamps and coins with his image on there. And then lo and behold, the Haas Select Committee had their findings, and it was on the nightly news, little snippets about what they found and the hearings and whatnot. I became hooked. So for the first 10 years or so, it was more just like reading other people's work. I did 0.0 original research. But the 25th anniversary really hit me for some reason and really just lit a fire under me to say, you know what, I'm going to do something original on this. Didn't know exactly what, but I said, I'm just too interested to let this go. I mean, I had a life, a job like everybody else, blah, 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 but I was interested. Well, what happened was, again, that's why I have to tell this little story, because some things that might sound like they're not related actually have a big play on things. I think you can go this with anybody's background. Well, I was interested in a fictional show on the Secret Service called The Wild Wild West. A lot of your listeners probably know about it. They know about that Will Smith movie, which I don't like, but I won't go there. But I love the original series of Robert Conrad and Artemis Gordon. Again, it's a fictional show, but it's on the Secret Service. Well, when I started getting into the Kennedy assassination, not just the man and his administration, but the assassination, I started to look at the Secret Service, the agents, the men around the president, where everyone's looking at Kennedy. I was always looking at these gentlemen. I was intrigued about who they were. I started to find who these gentlemen were, whatnot. And I just it wasn't a totally original thing at the beginning, but I was like, wow, you know what, conspiracy or no conspiracy, this man should have been protected better. If he would have been protected, we wouldn't be arguing whether Oswald did it or not. The gentleman would have lived. And I was really frustrated by that. I think about the Truman assassination attempt. Truman lived. The Reagan assassination attempt. Reagan lived, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when I really started to get going. Again, this is a short story because this isn't going to be year to year. There's little points here. In 1991 was my very first major conference, and it was the third decade. I was 24 going on 25. And everybody in the audience was like old enough to be my father or grandfather. And I did a short presentation on the Secret Service, and it went over tremendously. I had people come up to me saying, boy, I guess that's why they call the Secret Service secret. I never paid attention to that before. I think you're really onto something. You should really do some of this. And that's when I began contacting these gentlemen. Keep in mind, this is before the internet. There was computer bulletin boards, but for all intents and purposes, the average person, including myself, didn't know about the internet and whatnot. So it was the old newspaper archives, microfiche, directory assistants, a lot of luck. And I found a lot of these gentlemen, former agents, and I started to question them. And they were tickled pink. Keep in mind, at the time, my voice was even higher, and I was 24, 25, and they were like, hey, some young whippersnapper. This isn't going anywhere, because I didn't even think I was going to be writing a book at the time. I got to, tell people that too. Well, the big moment. Everybody says, what was the big moment? Okay, we got your bio. Tell me about the one moment that really changed things for you in a positive way in this case. What made you really, really want to do it besides just an interest? Because everybody can have an interest. Anybody can read a book. What separates you from the person who just reads and is interested? What did that was September 27th, 1992, a day to live in infamy for me. I spoke to the head of JFK's White House detail, Gerald Bain, last name spelled B-E-H-N. And I asked him matter-of-factly, I was on the fence at the time about some of these stories that alleged that President Kennedy had ordered the men off the car, didn't want the bubble top, et cetera, et cetera. I was on the fence about it. I was skeptical. I had nothing to go on if there was anything wrong with that. So I just matter-of-factly ran it by him thinking he's going to corroborate it, didn't think anything of it. And he told me, I don't remember Kennedy ever saying anything about not having agents on the car. If you look at the newsreels, you'll see agents on there from time to time. I went numb. I couldn't believe he was telling me this. This is the number one agent. This is like Douglas MacArthur, not some buck private. This is the number one agent who had Kennedy's ear, also had Johnson's ear. He was in the Secret Service from 1939 to 1967, one of the most, still to this day, one of the most respected agents of the service. I couldn't believe he was telling me this. He was flabbergasted. Luckily for history, he consented to being recorded, so I had this on audio tape, and the gentleman passed away about 7 months later of cancer. So thank the Lord that I contacted him, asked this question. I was flabbergasted. Now, when I got calm, like a couple of days later, I said, wait a minute, you got to be skeptical, Vin. I always think of him as a skeptic. Someone's going to say, you know what, Vin, this is a senile old man, even though he sounded very lucid, very together. Hey, he could just be one guy. Maybe he's mistaken. You got to get corroboration. And boy, did I get corroboration. This is what led to my first book, Survivor's Guilt, The Secret Service and the Failure to Protect the President. From that point on, from 1992, you could argue even to the present time, but we'll say up to like a few years ago when the book came out, 2013, I started to contact all these gentlemen, every possible former agent who protected Kennedy I could find, including White House aides and whatnot. Everybody consented to being audio taped. I did that. If not, I got it in writing or both. Sometimes I got lucky. Whatnot, the agents would go on the record, and it was like a cue card. They were from different parts of the country, and a lot of times they didn't know I contacted their comrades, and they were telling me the same thing over and over again. President Kennedy never ordered us to do anything, never ordered us off the car. Oh, he didn't order the bubble top off. Oh, that's a myth. Oh, here's a very nice man. Never interfere with. They said that so many times. It was like you're reading cue card. He never interfered with us at all. So the $64 million question for your listeners is, wait a minute. I read the Warren Report. I read William Manchester. I read Jim Bishop. I'm reading my history books in high school and college. They claim President Kennedy didn't want that security. So it's a shame Oswald acted alone, or there was a conspiracy. Take your pick. But, President Kennedy kind of had it coming. He didn't want that security there. Just the way it was meant to be. It was fate. When you find out it's not true, that puts the onus on the Secret Service. That raises alarm bells of suspicion that security was stripped. At the very least, it's gross negligence for the Secret Service. At worst, it's conspiratorial workings to undermine a security to make sure the shot or shots happen. And again, just taking the most conservative view of this, if there's people out there that believe Oswald acted alone and the minority, well, that would have been prevented, and it's gross negligence. That's the most conservative spin you can put on this. And it was very valuable because a lot of these gentlemen in the intervening years passed away through attrition. They're older gentlemen, they passed away. So it's like for history, I got Sam Kinney, the driver of the FOB car, on the record. Other top associates, Gerald Bain, the head of the White House detail, on the record. A lot of the agents who were in Dallas, very important, on the record, and other trips. And they all were all telling me the same thing. And I also compared out, I got a lot of documents out of the National Archives that were available because the Assassination Records Review Board, it was created because of the Oliver Stone movie and all the uproar, some millions of documents were released. And in the late 90s on, I got a lot of these Secret Service reports, ones that weren't destroyed by the Secret Service. We'll get into that in a moment. In 1995, they destroyed a lot of the Secret Service trip reports for trips in this late summer and fall of Kennedy's, trips he was taking before his death. And I said to myself, wait a minute, how come on this trip he had really good security? He had a lot of motorcycles around the car. He had agents on the back of the car, or at least agents running with the car, whatnot. And that was the genesis of the book. Again, the first book is called Survivor's Guilt, The Secret Service and the Failure to Protect the President. I always use the original title, the President. It's actually President Kennedy. But yeah, that's what that is. So that's a big thumbnail sketch of that book. That was, it was amazing. And we'll go into more specifics about things I've uncovered there if you want. No problem at all. But
I would. I got a question for you first. Now, all your contact with the Secret Service, have you ever had any kind of blowback from them? Any kind of opposition to you?
Oh yes, big time. Yeah,
go ahead.
I had an angry call. It was funny after I made that call. There was no other way to put it. I went numb. I could not believe Gerald Baines telling me this. I always think, thank God I had this on tape. Could you imagine? No one would believe it. Oh, you're just some conspiracy buff. How do we know he really said that? Thank God I got it on tape. There it is. Him telling me President Kennedy never wore the agents off the car is amazing. Well, I contacted a couple of others. I was so buzzed by him telling me this. I was so inspired. I contacted everybody I could before they were comparing notes during those next 3 days. Well, on the third day, it was like basically September 30th, 1992, I got an angry call from Hamilton Brown, who at that time was the executive secretary of the Former Agents Association. Even though they're retired, just like the CIA and other organizations, they have little reunions and whatnot.
Yeah.
And he told me to cease and desist from contacting any more of my associates. I gave you no authority to do so. He was really angry. He even called my parents because evidently he found out I used my parents' number. And just basically, there was no threat of legal action because there's nothing wrong with the First Amendment, free citizen. I'm allowed to do what I want. But it's basically a shot across the bow to try to scare a young guy to maybe stop doing this or whatnot. And after a couple of days, I said, wait a minute. It's a free country. I'm not harassing anybody. I called. I was very polite, nice. They were nice. And they responded back, and I only talked to them one time. It wasn't like I'm harassing them or nothing. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody can do that. It's only when you call a second time if they don't want it, you can get in trouble, whatnot. And that's when I started to contact more guys. I got more bold, and some of these guys are telling me, hey, who died and made him boss? It's a free country. You're allowed to talk to me if you want. So I was emboldened by that. But, through the years, I got other things. Quite frankly, I've had a couple occasions where my mail's been opened.
Yes, man. Oh, yes. Boy, go ahead.
No doubt. Yeah, I'm telling you right now, only the Secret Service letters, former agents, they were open, slit down the sides. None of my other mail was ever taken or open, but those former agents' letters were. Interestingly enough, the letters appeared to be not tampered with, but they obviously took a look to see what the heck was inside. Probably wondering what this young kid's doing. And, after 9/11, the Patriot Act, whatnot, it was definitely leads you to more things. And we'll get into this in a moment. I don't get on a big tangent, but you're asking about what other blowback happened. Another big thing happened. Yeah. My old job, I was actually harassed by a former agent's good friend. He was attempting to write the CEO of my company and try to get me in trouble with my job, saying, hey, this guy's very unpatriotic. He's writing things very unpatriotic about this country and about some of my comrades. What are you going to do about this? It backfired on him. They said they were going to have legal action against him for harassment if he ever contacted them again. And luckily the CEO never read it because they always screen his mail. But the point is, look at that. Isn't that amazing? You think 50 years later, get a life, Oswald Act alone, there's nothing to this. And here's these instances right there off the top of my head of them tampering, them threatening, them, either covertly or overtly doing things to try to upset the apple cart, to try to get me either in trouble or to stop my research because I was onto something. And one more thing on that note was everybody's familiar with Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine, especially Clint Hill. He's the agent who famously jumped on the back of the limousine in Dallas, tried to do something after the shots happened or whatnot. Well, he's come out with several books. He has another book coming out in May. When I contacted him out of the blue in the summer of 2005, he had no books. He was in hiding, other than talking to 60 Minutes in 1975 and talking to William Manchester. A lot of people don't even remember that. That's all he ever did. And I got his private address and phone number from a former agent. Another mind-blowing incident. I couldn't believe this guy was giving me his private address. It was unlisted. I got to tell people that's unlisted. It wasn't like, oh, Vince, other people contacted Clint. How do you know you're not the only one? I know based on the fact he had unlisted phone number, unlisted address. And his reaction to me, I sent him, again, I was so bold, I sent him a 22-page letter, which was like a cliff notes of my then work in progress. And my basic thrust in the letter was, Clint, you shouldn't blame yourself. Your superiors were trying to blame Kennedy for not having you in the back of the car and whatnot and not having so many security measures invoked that they handicapped you. They hampered you. And it's not your fault. It's some of your supervisor's faults. And he was livid with me. He tried to pretend he could get the letter, even though you have a signed receipt. He got the letter. And then lo and behold, in the woodwork, I'm hearing, wait, Gerald Blaine, his good friend since the 50s, is coming out with a book called The Kennedy Detail. What? He's on the biggest publisher in the world, Simon & Schuster. What? These guys were fly fishing in Colorado and Virginia. They were totally retired. In fact, if anything, books were like the Antichrist of them. They were proud. I would never write my book. I would never sell out for any money. And these guys were in their late 70s at the time. They're early 80s now. And they never had any inkling of writing a book until, again, it just is what it is, until I upset the apple cart and he started to look at the internet, started to see what I had to write. They didn't know I was coming out with a book at the time until later. And they started to see this thing. In fact, Gerald Blaine even admitted in an interview, he started his book in the summer of 2005 when I sent my letter to Clint Hill, his good friend. After I started to see so many things on the internet trying to cast aspersions against some of my colleagues, I said, enough is enough. And Clint Hill is on record on C-SPAN He said, I destroyed all my personal notes. And Brian Lamb asked him, when did you destroy your private your notes? He goes, oh, let me think. Probably 2005. Gee, I wonder why. They probably thought, oh my God, this guy's going to start a congressional investigation. Oh my God, this young idiot, he's going to get everybody looking at us again. We can't do that. We got to protect the agency. So they came out with their book and they were blaming Kennedy. It was so crass, so overdone that people that aren't even aware of my research were saying, wait a minute, that'll protest is too much. These guys are saying that Kennedy ordered them off the car, was real vociferous, and because Kennedy ordered them off the car, that's the reason why the assassination happened. They're squeaky clean. They had nothing to do with anything, and it was all on the president, not on them. Really crass. It's like blame the victim times 10, the book. It was overdone. And he even mentions me with that, naming me, calls me a self-described Secret Service expert in a best-selling book. And Clint Hill came on his books trying to do the same thing. And it was all, I created a cottage industry for these gentlemen. So that's basically what it boils down to summarize. It was like a warfare of ideas. 50 years later, people could say, oh, what could we talk about? What can we get into? Everybody has these theories about what happened to Kennedy, blah, blah, blah. You'll never know the truth. Well, I'll say this. That may or may not be true, but I'll say this. It's still an active warfare of ideas when you got former agents writing books trying to blame the president because little old me, Vince Palamara, wrote to them out of the blue and scared the heck out of them, scared them into action to write these books and to make up these lies, make up meetings that never happened, made up dialogue that never happened. In case you're saying, well, those are bold charges, Vince, how are you backing this up? How I'm backing this up is I had these guys on tape or in letters or both telling me years before these gentlemen's books came out. And President Kennedy never ordered him off the car, never ordered him to do anything. Sam Kennedy, the driver of the fall-off car in Dallas and elsewhere, told me he was solely responsible for the bubble top's removal. Kennedy had nothing to do with it. He told me 3 times, 3 different occasions, okay? He was adamant Kennedy had nothing to do with it. By the way, Sam Kennedy believed there was a conspiracy. He thought Oswald was a sole shooter. Interesting, he thought there was a conspiracy, though. But more importantly, to the point, he was like, Kennedy never was. He was one of the nicest presidents ever to protect. A lot of this time, they always compare him to Truman. A lot of the agents say, oh, he was just like Truman. Kennedy never interfered with us at all. Whatever you guys want is the way it will be. And again, that onus comes back to the Secret Service. And I'm a big fan of the Secret Service. It's not a witch hunt. I may be a harsh critic of November 22nd, but I'm a big fan of the agency, 1865 to the present. In fact, Robert DeProspero, the former #1 agent under Reagan, contacted me out of the blue a few years ago and said, I'm paraphrasing, I'm a big fan of your work. I like the way you tell it like it is. And we've become friends since then. I'm an associate producer of a forthcoming documentary on the guy. This guy's one of my fans. He's the guy who protected President Reagan for 3 years, #1 agent. So I have my friends. I have my enemies, too, in the agency, but I have my friends, too. And, because it is what it is. I always tell people, have your Oswald in the window if you want. If you want to be a jerk about it, if you're one of those people who think Oswald had alone, have Oswald in the window. This could have been prevented and should have been prevented. And another thing I'll get into, beyond, blaming the president for it, so a major discovery of mine was, and I found it by accident going through newspaper archives and whatnot, and that began it, that during the FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy administration, before the assassination, building rooftops were regularly guarded. It wasn't just for the inaugural. It was a matter of regular course that the building rooftops are guarded by the sheriff's department, local police agents, or all the above. So I'm like, wait a minute now. Why wasn't this invoked in Dallas? And I brought this up because I found a document came out, late 1990s, the Tampa, Florida trip Kennedy took 4 days before Dallas. It was 28 miles long. It was like something like 5 or 6 times longer than Kennedy's motorcade in Dallas. It was much longer. And they had multi-story building rooftops guarded by the sheriff's department. They couldn't afford to do that in a much shorter motorcade in Dallas. But it turns out Gerald Blaine of the Kennedy Detail fame, the author of the Kennedy Detail, wrote this report. And he was asked about it because little old me brought it up. And Larry Sabato, probably a lot of people know Larry Sabato. He's been on CNN a lot talking about the 2016 election. Well, he also wrote a book called The Kennedy Half Century, a best-selling book on the assassination. He interviewed Gerald Blaine about this, thanks to little old me and my blog at the time. And Gerald Blaine said something really lame. He said, well, we didn't have the manpower in Dallas to watch the buildings. I'm like, wait a minute, wait. You had the manpower in Tampa to watch a much longer motorcade. You had the sheriff's department guarding every multi-story building. You didn't have the manpower to do it in a much shorter motorcade in Dallas. And then you got the precedent again. FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and pre-Dallas, they were watching buildings. And to explain for your listeners how this worked is, this is why you got to always be careful about still photos and whatnot. Somebody could Google an image and say, hey, Vince, explain yourself here, pal. I don't see a lot of overt protection from President Kennedy on this trip. I don't see agents around the car. I don't see a lot of overt protection. Explain yourself. Here's how I explain myself. There's no doubt that the Secret Service had manpower issues in 1963. There was only like 300-some agents the whole wide world at the time. And the White House details approximately 36 agents. They relied on local police, military, and whatnot, the sheriff's department. But how they got around this was they had multi-story building rooftops guarded. They watched the speed of the car. They had motorcycles around the car. They had a good intelligence finding out in advance if there was any threat to the president. If the car is going 30 miles an hour and building rooftops are guarded, there's no such thing as 100% protection, but it'd be 50 times better than what happened in Dallas when he's going 11 miles an hour or less and building rooftops unguarded. No one's around the car, no motorcycles around the car, no bubble top. I mean, the list goes on. That's why I wrote a book, because there's much more than that. But that's basically what it boils down to. It was like a real electrifying moment. I found all these newspaper articles from FDR to JFK where they're saying, police are going to monitor the rooftops of buildings, whatnot, during the downtown parade. And I found official documents saying the same thing. Well, I spoke. This is really the coup d'etat here. I spoke to, or coup de grace.
Coup de grace.
Coup de grace, whatever.
Slip of the tongue.
Michael Tarina was the chief inspector of the Secret Service. Michael Tarina is the gentleman who wrote the Secret Service manual. By the way, all these statements I'm saying are documented in my books. You don't have to take my word for it. Go to my book. It's all heavily documented. You can go to the exact book or document or interview. A lot of the stuff is available online as well to back up what I'm saying. Again, this is the guy who wrote the Secret Service manual, chief inspector of the Secret Service. If anybody in the world would know proper security, this gentleman was. Well, in 1962, a long out of print book, very long out of print, probably only lasted a year or two, a book called What Does a Secret Service Agent Do? It was made for young adults and whatnot. Well, he contributed heavily to the book. And on a page of the book, it says, matter of factly, whenever the president is in a motorcade, agents or police guard the roofs of buildings. I'm like, whoa, this is even more corroboration. I spoke to him, and he didn't get into any detail. He just confirmed the veracity of that statement. In other words, he confirmed that was true. He didn't say, oh, that's wrong, or I was misquoted. He confirmed that. He's just confirming what all the other newspaper articles and reports say. There's a couple photos I found, because a lot of times, keep in mind, the focus of the photographs are on the president. They're not on multi-story buildings, but I've caught a couple photographs where you can see actual police officers standing on rooftops. Russell Groover was a motorcycle policeman on that Tampa motorcade I talked about. It was 28 miles long, much longer in Dallas. He confirmed to me in email and on the phone that, here's how we protected Kennedy in Tampa. That we drove at a very fast rate of speed, so one-story buildings were okay. One-story buildings were guarded because we had the military police or regular police watching the buildings from the street. They weren't watching Kennedy. They were looking at the buildings, and the cars were going fast. When they went to the downtown area of Tampa, all of those multi-story buildings were guarded by the sheriff's department. So, and then also they had men on the back of the car, too. But I just wanted to, for the audience, to just think about that for a second. My God, in Dallas, there wouldn't have been any assassination. Even if you believe, I always take devil's advocate. Even if it was Lee Harvey Oswald, he's here, if his man like a carcater getting ready for action, they would have spotted him. The motorcade would have been aborted. He would have been shot or captured, killed, whatever. But the bottom line, if these men would have been there, and it gets the onus, comes back to the Secret Service. And I'm torn. People ask me, do you think it's a sinister? Do you think it was just negligence? I'm torn. It actually depends on my mood. I'm a very open-minded person. I go back and forth on this, whether this was on purpose or this was some tragic accident, and they covered up for it afterward. Keep in mind, America was a very innocent country, naive country in 1963. It was before the Vietnam War became a war, before Watergate, before distrust in politics. Average kid said, I want to be president, I want to be an astronaut, whatnot. So when the government's saying it's Lee Harvey Oswald act alone, that's it. And when they're also saying that President Kennedy told the agents not to do certain things, well, most people are going to believe that. Who in the right mind would question that? Say, well, the president didn't want them there. Another major discovery of mine was I found out there's no.
Wait. I tell you what, Vince. Before you get
even saying that.
Now, Vince, if you like what you're hearing from Vince right now, he's got a blog spot, vincentpalamara.blogspot.com. He's also got a YouTube channel, Vince Palamara. And, YouTube user Vince Palamara. And IMDb page. What were we on TV a couple of times, Vince?
Oh, yeah, several times. Yeah, the Men Who Killed Kennedy, C-SPAN, credits on a couple of shows for Discovery Channel and whatnot. Yeah, and I got 3 documentaries that are done. I'm just waiting for them to come out on DVD. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So now, when we left off, we were talking about the Florida informant down there that had a very credible informant.
Yes. Yeah, I'll pick up where we left off. Okay,
Yeah.
So this, again, 28-mile motorcades. This is the major trip before Texas was the one to Florida. We went to Cape Canaveral, Miami, and Tampa. And again, there was threats. In fact, there were 6 pages worth of threats. A lot of this, keep in mind, only came out in the late 1990s because little old me, ordered the documents from the archives. At the time, they were a couple $100s. I would dare say, out of the billions of people on this planet, how many people were going to A, know about these documents, and B, fork over a couple $100s to get the copies of the documents? And as far as I know, I might have been the only one that I know of, but that's another story. But then more importantly, this Tampa trip and Miami trip as well, both these trips, we'll talk about both. It's 6 long pages of names of threats to the president. A couple were actually specific, talking about, like the shooter when he goes to the downtown motorcade, blah, 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 and like a lot of specific names, whereas you get to Dallas, there wasn't any of those names. That's why chapter 2 of my book, I go into that, and I'll allude to that in a moment. But again, somebody can make the case, well, the reason why he had so much protection in Tampa, fair enough, is because of these threats. There was a lot of threats. And he gets to Dallas, the overt story, the official story is, despite the president himself saying we're heading to nut country now, despite several people warning the president not to go to Dallas, one of them being Senator William Fulbright, and there was other famous ones. Pretty much everybody knows, but no one disputes this either by either side of the argument. It was, I concede that Dallas was a dangerous place. John Birch Society, the wanted for treason signs, the welcome Mr. Kennedy to Dallas black border ad, where they're saying all these treasonous, hateful things about Kennedy. And it's right-wing Dallas nut country, the presidents that were in the nut country. They find not one person who has a threat against the president. We're supposed to believe that. And I say chapter 2 of my book, Survivor's Guilt, the reason why that was done, even Roy Kellerman, under oath to the Warren Commission, told Gerald Ford, who at the time was a Warren Commission member, yes, that was unusual. We didn't find any threats. I think the reason why that was done was that was another cover story. They could say, hey, we didn't have all this overt for protection for the president. We didn't find any threats. I think they did find threats. And again, this is why I'm on the fence whether this is sinister or negligence. And they find the threats, didn't act upon it, and they covered this up afterwards, or it was done on purpose to eliminate any kind of advantage of security that, we didn't find any threats. Meantime, they did, but I'm not going to let you know that. And there you go. And couple major discoveries that I was alluding to for the commercial break. This goes right hand in glove of Tampa and the security he got versus the security he did not receive in Dallas. I discovered a major covert monitoring of threats to the president. Now, this name is going to be familiar to people that are in the know who have read books. His name's Glenn Bennett. Yeah. Glenn Bennett was an agent riding in the follow-up car. And again, it's only came out in the late 1990s about the background of Mr. Bennett. Okay, you might say, okay, so what, Vince? It's the name of an agent in the follow-up car. What's so great about that? Well, he was actually an agent from the intelligence division of the Secret Service. These were guys who was a desk job. They monitored, back then really wasn't computers, so it was more like index cards of police reports and threats and whatnot. Whenever the president, for example, would go to Philadelphia, New York, whatnot, they would say, hey, Glenn, check the files. Is there any nutcases, any conspiracies, anything about the president? If there are, we got to investigate this. We got to at least make sure this guy's watching as the motorcade passes. Well, this guy, all of a sudden, Glenn Bennett, he's actually in physical motorcades. It gets much worse. That's the reason why I wrote a whole chapter on Glenn Bennett and his one associate. Well, not only is he on the Dallas trip, you might say that's an isolated incident, maybe it was manpower. It was one of the excuses used. He was on all the stops in Florida, and he was on all the stops in New York City right before the assassination. This is where it gets interesting. He lies under oath to the Haas Select Committee. They interviewed him. Again, these documents only came out in the late 1990s. He says, I was not on the Florida trip. Meantime, these documents come out, and pictures have come out. Since I know what he looks like now, in 2013, finally found out 2 years ago what the gentleman actually looks like, a good picture of him. It's like, my God, you can actually see photos of him in Tampa. He's walking beside the presidential limousine. He's riding on the follow-up car. So he lies under oath about being on the Florida trip when he was on every single trip. And this was only 15 years later. You can't say it's amnesia and it's 50 years later. Maybe the guy's mistaken. No, this was only 15 years after. And he was represented by a Secret Service lawyer during his little interview. I guess maybe he was worried, like, oh, I got to have my attorney with me in case they ask me a question. But he lied. He point blank lied, and he was on all these trips, and he was riding in the FOB car. You might say, okay, he's lying. He's on all these trips. What's this mean? What this means was he joins the White House detail from PRS right past mid-November because the Secret Service had multiple mortal threats against President Kennedy, and they wanted Glenn on these motorcades to monitor them. And guess what? The president's brutally assassinated, and they covered up not only their negligence, they covered up the fact that he was there as a covert monitor. Can you imagine if John Q. Citizen would have knew, even in 1963-64, wait a minute, you and a Secret Service agent was specifically there to monitor threats, that you knew of threats in advance, and he's killed under your watch. That's why it was so important to say Oswald Aguilera was a nutcase, it was a quirk of fate, a man in a building shot a man in a car. And it was also why it was very important that a dead president was blamed for his lack of security, because, yeah, it makes sense. Hey, the Secret Service, they're saying that he didn't want this protection next. So that's why people got off the ball and started getting their little theories and ghosts on the grassy knoll, because that gets everybody in a tailspin, like Donald Sutherland's character in JFK says. It becomes like a parlor game. Who shot the president? It goes, it spins its wheels. It's very inconclusive because you can't really prove beyond a reasonable doubt. But in my opinion, you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the president should have been protected better. It was negligence or worse. And again, you could go prior precedent of trips. And Glenn Bennett's, and before we even catch your breath about Glenn Bennett's, his presence on these trips, they're lying about it. He's lying about it, and the president's killed. They're not saying what he's done. Clint Hill, a little slip up in his book. That's why it's harder to cover up the lie than it is the truth. Because you're telling the truth, you don't have to worry about cover-ups. You're just going to free and just say anything comes out of your mouth. Well, in his 2012 book, Mrs. Kennedy and Me, he says Glenn Bennett was in Dallas monitoring intelligence. I'm like, oh, really? Because the official story is he was just another agent. He wasn't there as an intelligence guy. They just needed manpower, and that's he was there. Clint Hill, it was a best-selling book, and people don't realize what a smoking gun that is. Wow. He's also confirming he was there as an intelligence agent. Well, I discovered another agent that was on that trip. He was on the Austin trip. That was the trip that Kennedy would have lived if he would have got his head blown off in Dallas. They were heading to Austin. Agent called Howard K. Norton was definitely on that trip. There's no doubt about it. Again, late 1990s, these Secret Service survey reports came out for the trip that he was going to make to Austin, Secret Service, and duly noted as the name Norton. I spoke to one of his colleagues. At the time, I only had the last name Norton. Who's this Norton? And Dale Wunderlich was an agent in the intelligence division. Oh, that's Howard K. Norton. He's the agent who was famous. He found the resonance cavity in the United Nations where the Russians were trying to bug us, and we found the bug thanks to that old Howard K. Norton. Well, other agents I spoke to all had amnesia. Told me, I don't remember a Howard Norton. No, I never heard of him at all. No one can remember him other than Dale Wunderlich. And then I contacted the Secret Service, the current living, breathing Secret Service. They have no tenure dates for a Howard K. Norton. And it gets even worse. The former Agents Association, all you have to be is a member of the agency for 1 year, and you're a member for life. That's it, you're a member. Gerald O'Rourke was on that trip to Texas. He says, I don't remember a Howard K. Norton. Vince, if he would have been a member of the Secret Service for at least a year, trust me, he'd be on our roster because that's the way it is. Living or dead, we have a record of him. I don't remember this Howard K. Norton. Yet there's no doubt that, A, his name is on the trip. No doubt he was an intelligence agent, and no doubt Dale Wunderlich, an associate, went into great and glorious detail who he was. He even provided his middle initial and asked the other question. No, I never was able to locate him. I don't know if this is a common name. The gentleman died. He was kept under wraps. But again, oh my God, they had another intelligence agent on that trip to Texas. So we're supposed to believe that little old Kennedy, this rendezvous with death, his favorite poem. Meantime, we're all the rendezvous with death. We're not immortal. We're all going to die someday. But JFK loved this poem, and he went to Texas. He didn't want the bubble top. He didn't want those agents screening him in the back of the car and all this nonsense, all this crap. And then we're also not told that we had intelligence agents on the trip from the Secret Service covertly monitoring mortal threats. There was a lot more than Oswald out there, folks. and he gets his head blown off in Dallas. There's horrible security, horrible lack of intelligence, and supposedly the story is they found no threats.
Yeah, but Vince,
I don't believe it's bunk.
Now stop and think of this. Stop and think of this. Now you're the intelligence officer, right? So you know all these threats. Oswald, being a defector to and from Russia, had to be on that list.
Exactly.
Now listen, you're riding in the car. You got to say, hey, you know what? One of these guys lives right up here. He works right up in this building, right here.
Right.
As you're driving under it, because all these addresses are in your head. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the funny thing is that when you look at the Alkins photo, the famous black and white photo of Elm Street where Kennedy's arms are splayed towards his throat before the fatal headshot. It's a pretty famous photo. I think everybody knows. That's the man in the doorway photo, or people think it's Oswald, so that's Billy Lovelady. But anyway, Glenn Bennett in the file car is looking right at the Texas School Book Depository. No one else is. He's looking right smack dab at that building when the shooting began. It's almost as if he knew, again, this is speculation. My God, the shots are coming from that building, or at least some of the shots. Now, it opens up a can of worms, because not only did Sam Kinney believe there's a conspiracy, Sam Kinney, matter of fact, he said, the back of the president's head blew off. I had that piece of the back of the president's head on the C-130, head back to the autopsy, in Maryland, blah, blah, blah. Paul Landis said, in two reports, the shots came from the front. Dave Powers, a loyal Kennedy aide, had the feeling they were heading into an ambush, and Powers and O'Donnell both said the shots came from the front, but to Tip O'Neill. But it did not to get off.
Oh, I think I'm losing you. Okay.
Good. But good. There was another major discovery I can get into if you want to real quick about presidential security.
Well, let's talk about this, because we only have 9 minutes left. Can you give me another half hour?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I knew you would, man. You love talking about this stuff. Okay, great. It would probably be harder for me to stop you, right? If the show is over. Okay, now, what were you just about to say?
Oh, no, real quick. I'll make this very short.
Yeah.
Again, what we said before commercial break is most people would think, it's very logical to think on its face that, hey, the president's the boss. He's the one who tells the security, I don't want this done, I don't want that done. You're just a little old agent. Most people, 99% of people say, that sounds plausible to me. It turns out it's not true. And I go into great detail in the new book that's coming out next year. And I went into a decent amount of detail in the first book about this, but it turns out it's not true. An article came out in the Associated Press that was in many newspapers around the country, November 15, 1963, a week before the assassination. It says the Secret Service can overrule even the president where his personal security is involved. I found so much corroboration for that. Even President Truman's on record saying the Secret Service is the only boss the President of the United States really has. Lyndon Johnson also quoted that President Truman little sentence about Secret Service security. Chief Huey Bauman was the Secret Service director before JFK, says in his book, the president knew that by law we called the shots when it comes to security. The list goes on. There's just an only where buildings normally watch. The Secret Service was the one. Like Clint Hill, this is amazing. Again, it's harder to keep the lie under than is the truth. Clint Hill, in a 2010 sixth-floor oral history, and again, his video is not available commercially. You have to order it and whatnot. It's not for copies or whatnot. He says that the president can tell you what he wants done, but what we used to do is listen to the president. Then we did what we wanted to anyway. So that's the real truth right there. Not what they're trying to, this malarkey they have in their books now trying to blame Kennedy. Even if hypothetically he did not, but even if hypothetically Kennedy said, I don't want you gentlemen there, they would have did what they wanted to anyway. You want more proof? Clint Hill rode on the back of the car briefly in Main Street, which is a block before the assassination site. Oh, I thought the Kennedy didn't want you there. I thought he ordered you off the limousine, Clint. Uh-oh, doesn't realize the contradiction, still doesn't. He's on the rear of the car. I thought Kennedy didn't want you there. He also doesn't realize the contradiction of saying over and over again through the decades that the back of the president's head's gone. That indicates a shot from the front, but he doesn't get that. Just like Governor Connolly to his dying day never understood that being shot by a separate bullet means that there was two shooters. See, these guys are compartmentalized. They're so ingrained in their brains that the government couldn't be involved. There's no conspiracy, and getting that across to people that sometimes they don't realize what they're saying and doing goes against official history, and that's what it's all about. But it took little old me to upset the apple cart. Oh, another thing I forgot to leave out too was another threat I received is Gerald Blaine. A year before his book came out, I got a letter from his lawyer telling me basically to take down my blog, that I'm trying to insinuate that I had a hand in his book. And I was like, wait a minute, no, I'm not. I'm just advertising his forthcoming book. but it was like a shot across the bow. It was very silly. It was like they're trying to scare me into submission, and maybe I'd take down my blog and go away. As before my book came out, it really shocked the heck out of them. They were not expecting little old me to come out with a book, but I was like a flying on the internet and influencing people because they realized there's another story. In fact, you can even see it on Gerald Blaine's Amazon reviews. A lot of people quote from me. I read Vince Palamara's website. I read Vince Palamara's book. So at least my words getting out there, people are realizing that, wait a minute now, there's two sides to every story here, and this isn't jiving. And I think it's very tragic because not only do we have the loss of the president and all this character assassination about him sleeping around and whatnot that may or may not be true, but it's no excuse for his murder. But now we got the Secret Service agents trying to blame him for his own assassination by falsely blaming him for lack of security. They blame him for not having the motorcycles beside him, which is total bunk. He had tons of motorcycles around him in Houston, San Antonio, and Fort Worth right before the assassination. It goes on and on. The level of just excuses and just blaming the victim is outrageous. So, yeah.
Well, I can tell you this. Just was it yesterday or the day before? Yeah, it was the day before. I was covering the Hillary Clinton campaign stop here at the rally here in Nevada.
Ooh,
okay. Oh, yeah. And it was delayed. It was delayed a couple hours because the Secret Service was in there clearing the building. And the Secret Service, they are definitely more in control of the event than the campaign staff and even the candidate who's the ex-wife, the wife, ex-wife, who knows? But the wife of a former president. They don't seem to live together. The only time they're together is when they're running for president. So, yeah, the Secret Service is totally in charge of all that stuff. Beyond. And also, too, yeah, even with press credentials and stuff like that, I'm sure if they recognize my name, they wouldn't let me in. If I was considered a threat or whatever, you can't get in. So they're more in charge of it than the candidate themselves.
Right.
Okay, I tell you what. Okay, let's take a break now. We're going to be doing another half hour with the Vince Palamara from JFK to Parkland. JFK from Parkland to Bethesda, the Ultimate Kennedy Assassination Compendium, and the other books are Survivor's Guilt, the Secret Service, and the Failure to Protect President Kennedy. And coming up is the Not So Secret Service. Agency tales from FDR to the Kennedy assassination. And there's so much to talk about with the Secret Service. So it's a real amazing stuff that goes on with these guys. VincePalamara.blogspot.com and on YouTube, Vince Palamara. Now, when we get back, what I want to ask you, and I love the way you do everybody's voices when you talk about these people arguing with you. I love that part. But let's get into Parkland to Bethesda. The differences between what's in the reports at Parkland and then what we see later on at Bethesda. Okay, Vince. To lay out your case, the differences between Parkland and Bethesda, and do all the voices like you do, okay?
I get it.
Go ahead.
Okay. The official story is obviously Lee Harvey Oswald was shooting from the rear, from the sixth floor. It's the story of the Texas School Book Depository, so you would expect all the shots would only be from the rear, nothing from the front. And yet, when JFK's body gets to Parkland Hospital, the doctors and nurses, the vast majority, couple exceptions, but even those exceptions have a couple of things they've said that go against visual history, but the majority of them said that the rear of the president's head was gone, appeared to be an exit wound. Either they said it appeared to be an exit wound, or they said it appeared that the shot came from the front, or just by just saying that the right rear of the head was gone, that's the scientific evidence of the shot coming from the front. Because entrance holes make small holes, exit holes make large holes. That's a scientific fact that nobody argues with. In addition, they also said the other wound on the president's neck was, in the front of the neck, I should say, what most people thought was just the tracheotomy. They made a tracheotomy over that bullet hole. They said it appeared to be an entrance wound, and they were near unanimous on that as well. It was a landslide in both cases at Parkland Hospital. Okay. In fact, use my voice when one of the nurses came in, Jackie Hunt, and she said that I can't even see the wound. And one of the doctors said, well, here, I'm going to pick up the head. You can see this now. And he moved the head slightly, and you could see the right rear of the head was gone. So it wasn't on the side, wasn't on the front. His face was fine. He also said his face was fine. He didn't even look like he was sleeping or there was nothing wrong until they went around the back. In fact, there's even stories, a couple of them shined a flashlight briefly, little flashlight to show the extent of the wound. Dr. Robert McClellan said he was standing there with nothing to do but hold the retractor for a good 10, 15, 20 minutes. They had a lot of time, that's a long time in minutes to count down to stare at a wound, especially the wound of the President of the United States. Now, these doctors and nurses always saw gunshot wounds. It was Texas. They had guns. This every night good old boys would get drunk and shoot each other. So they were used to what entrance and exit wounds looked like. They might not have been forensic pathologists, but they saw a lot of gunshot wounds on just about a daily basis, if not on a weekly basis, quite a few. They all said that, we saw gunshot wounds all the time. So when they said it appeared to be an entrance hole, appeared to be an exit hole, especially at that time, so early on, they didn't have a dog in the hunt. They were just saying what they saw. It's what it was. And in fact, Dr. Malcolm Perry and Dr. Ken Clark told the whole world that day in a press conference. It was televised on all three networks. It was simulcast that, the bullet appeared to be coming at him from the front. It was an entrance wound, yes, on the neck. It appeared that the back of the head was gone. And all the newspapers and wire services picked it up, and, little differences and whatnot of the way they described it. Everyone was left the impression he was shot from the front. But here's the thing. This is before the internet. When people didn't compare and contrast, there weren't investigative reporters as we know them now. People didn't question things. My mom and dad tell me to this day there'd been 10 people could have shot Kennedy. We were so bereaved. The details went in one ear and went out the other. And I think that's the success of the assassination, the coup d'etat. I do believe there's a conspiracy. I've waffled in the past, but my present feeling on things is it was definitely a conspiracy. And I think that was their advantage, because they knew that America was a naive country. They knew the details wouldn't matter. It would just be the bottom line: this guy was killed. Now, that's the Parkland side. To get directly to the contrast here, you would expect, we're going to the autopsy now in Bethesda, Maryland, and these the autopsy doctors, they're going to show that the Parkland people were all wrong, right? Well, according to many people from Bethesda, he was also shot from the front. He also had the back of the head gone. And it appeared that he was shot from the front. They're all saying to this day they thought that the autopsy report would come out and show that. Well, it turns out none of the autopsy doctors, Hughes, Boswell, or Fink, ever did a gunshot wound autopsy. Even people that believed Oswald acted alone said it was a horrible autopsy. They'd give it an F. Michael Bobbitt's favorites were saying it was a terrible autopsy. These guys had no forensic skills as we know them now. They were not CSI guys, to put it mildly. These guys were just they were teachers. They taught their students and whatnot, and they were good clinical pathologists, but forensic pathologists, no way. They were either elements. And they were also military doctors that were subservient to military orders. They were just captains in the Navy. When he had admirals and generals around telling them what to do, Admiral Berkeley was the president's personal physician telling them what not to do, and they appeared to be leading the autopsy. They're just going to go along, go with the flow. They might have left telltale clues because, like Dr. Hume said, the wound appeared to extend somewhat into the occipital. Well, that's kind of like being kind of pregnant. It's either in the back of the head or it's not. If they're saying it extended somewhat in the back of the head, then we got a problem here, because officially the wound's only in the side closer to the front of the head. What are you talking about, the occipital wound? It's almost like you're trying to have it both ways, leaving little clues. The brain was never recorded on the autopsy. They never recorded the weight of the brain in the autopsy. It's like, wait a minute. That's standard. It's what you do. The first thing you do when you get up and you put your shoes on, you tie your shoelaces. For an autopsy, it's the first thing you do. You weigh the brain, you put the brain weight down. Well, it turns out the official brain weight was 1,500 grams. That doesn't make any sense. That's more than the average weight of a brain, of a fully formed brain that wasn't shot up by gunshots. And there's conflicting reports that the brain was either totally gone, partially gone, a lot of it was gone. So how in the God's green earth could it be 1,500, which is about 1,500 grams, about 1,500 more than normal? That doesn't make any sense. And or something like that, like 700 more. But anyway, the point being is there should have been a lot more. There's big red flags and clues and whatnot. So you have the autopsy doctors kind of speaking out of both sides of their mouth, but all the sundry people that were there, the X-ray technicians and whatnot. In fact, one of my big thing I just talked about the Secret Service. Well, I interviewed or corresponded with a fair share of Parkland people and Bethesda people. And one of the great things about my location here in Pittsburgh, PA, was Gerald Custer, who did the actual X-rays on President Kennedy at the autopsy. I interviewed him on video extensively over 2 days in 1991 and over 2 days in 1998. The fruits of that labor is in Harry Treason's best-selling book, High Treason 2, a whole chapter on Gerald Custer. It's also a whole chapter in William Law's book, In the Eye History, and it's also in my book. And Gerald Custer, even though, again, I all warts and all are in the book. It's not just, I'm cherry picking what they're saying. Everything they have to say, good, bad, and ugly, is out there. And you're definitely left with the impression there was a conspiracy and the president was shot from the front. But it also includes things that seem to contradict what they said before. It's all out there for people to decide. It's the weight of the evidence is overwhelming that he was shot from the front. Gerald Custer, now getting to this, was the great fortuitous that he was so close by. He was only like about a half hour away. He passed away in 2000, by the way. But we got him on video many hours, and he was basically saying the same thing, that, my God, I thought this gentleman was shot in the front. I couldn't tell my wife about the autopsy till like 1978 because they were under an oath of silence. They could be court-martialed, sent to Leavenworth. Their pensions would be gone. They'd be arrested. They would be dishonorably discharged. Their world would be a world of you-know-what. So they couldn't even tell their wives, their friends, they did the autopsies. That's how they got around the cover-up. So people would say, oh, come on. How could they get away with this so-called conspiracy? That's how they did a conspiracy of silence. Again, America was naive. Country 63-64, they issued a proclamation, Oswald act alone. These guys had military careers to uphold. They were petty officers. They were little like privates, all points in between. And life went on for these guys. They went to the Vietnam War. Some of these men didn't come back. Some did, or they came back injured. But the bottom line is they had families to feed. They had military careers. And the government, the big old government, handling their pension, handling their life's work, is telling them one thing. Privately, they felt one way, but they couldn't even tell their wives because the gag order, the military, the defense secretary at the time of the Carter administration had to lift that gag order for them to talk to the House Select Committee. Then get this, ladies and gentlemen, listen out there. It was not, their actual statements weren't going to be released till 50 years after 1978. It was only because the Oliver Stone movie got everybody mad. At the end of the Stone movie, it said that those files were going to be held until, I think he said something like the year 2028, something like that. And people were outraged. Wait a minute. If Oswald acted alone, there's nothing to this. Why are they locking up all these documents? So the Assassination Records Review Board, a federal board appointed by George H.W. Bush near the last days of his term and really enacted by Clinton, came forward. So from 1994 to 1998, they went through millions of pages of documents, released them, and actually did some more interviews of medical people, by the way, which is tremendous stuff. They got these guys under subpoena and got them out there, and begrudgingly, a lot of these guys had stuff to say, and it went against official history. It's a landslide of things going against official history. These guys are so compartmentalized, they don't even know the ramifications of what they're saying half the time, especially the autopsy doctors. Humes in particular was very belligerent, very much a curmudgeon, didn't want to be, he basically said, didn't want to come here, to be honest with you. And he's really testy, and he's answering things, and he's realizing, like, wait a minute, this doesn't look right to me at all. This autopsy photo doesn't look right to me. This brain photograph doesn't look right to me. I could have sworn we took photographs of the interior of the chest. Those photos don't exist. So what we're left with, to sum this up for the audience, would be, we have a situation where the official story is Oswald acted alone, the shots only came from the rear. The medical evidence in my book is pretty much a landslide from both hospitals that he was shot from the front. We have missing autopsy photos, missing autopsy x-rays. The photos don't match the x-rays. The x-rays don't match the photos. The photos and x-rays don't match what people recollect. Not one person has ever looked at the photos and x-rays and said, yep, that's what I saw. Darn it, that's it. They all say, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this. In fact, this is what I was alluding to before. I said there's a couple exceptions on both sides. It's the vast minority seem to imply that the autopsy was right, but they say things that go against official history. Perfect example is Dr. Kenneth Salyer. He's one of the odd men out that appears to indicate that the wound was more on the side than the back at Parkland. You might say, oh, well, we got to weigh that and consider it, Vince. Maybe it's 20-some people, 20, 30 people said she was shot from front. But what do you say about Dr. Kenneth Salyer? Here's what I'll say about Dr. Kenneth Salyer. He said the autopsy photos are definitely forgeries. They've been altered because they're not right. There's not what he saw that day. He said, you got 2 beveled wounds in these photos. That's not right. Something's been done with these photos. They've been tampered with. He's on record. He's on video saying they've been tampered with. He's talked to private researchers and authors saying they're tampered with. So again, even these guys that are in the gross minority have something to say in one way or another that goes against official history. Another one is Richard Lipsey, who was on the Bethesda side. He seems to be the odd man out that, oh, bummer. He seems to indicate that the shots only came from the rear. But he also indicates that Kennedy was hit 3 times. Wait a minute. I thought he was only hit twice. He hit 3 different gunshots. And he also goes through the litany of things that were done and not done. He seems to back up David Lifton's body alteration scheme, that there was decoy ambulances. A lot of them go through that, too. A lot of corroboration for Dave Lifton, his book, best-selling book, Best Evidence, that it appears the body was hijacked and altered either at Bethesda or somewhere else, that the wounds left and they were smaller at Parkland. He gets to Bethesda, and the back of the head was like the size of an egg. It becomes huge, and it's like ambiguous. It goes from the rear to the side both. It's like this ambiguous. It's from the front, from the back. He appeared to have a decent amount of brain at Parkland. He gets to Bethesda and hardly any brains left. In fact, one guy said there was no brain at all. And you got the FBI guys who basically said, oh, Oswald acted alone. There's nothing to this. But then they say the back of the head was gone. There's no doubt about it. They do not believe the single bullet theory. They were adamant about it to their dying day. James Cyber having a letter from him, and Frank O'Neill's on video saying it's the same thing too. The single bullet theory was all inspectors crap. That there's nothing to that. That's why it's always important to look at the totality of evidence. There's people that believe Oswald acted alone that will cherry pick. There's people on the conspiracy side that cherry pick. And what I did in my books, all my books really, but even Parkland Bethesda in particular, was to lay everything out. Okay, Dr. Salyer, he's one of the guys, the odd man out. But look what else he said. He said the autopsy photos are forged. That's very, very important. So
well, let me ask you this, Vince. Where do you think the autopsy photos were forged?
Why did he think that?
Not why. Where? Where could it have happened? Of course it happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the thing about that, it's very important for people to realize that they left there undeveloped that day. People didn't see the autopsy photos till several years later, and the general public didn't see them until many years later. Guess who had the autopsy photos and x-rays, people? The Secret Service.
Wow.
Yep, good old Secret Service. They went right to the possession of the guys in the motorcade. They took it to the Secret Service safe in the White House. So again, just like I lay out my first book, if you believe there's sinister activity involved, the buck stops with the Secret Service. They planned the trip. They were in charge of the protection. They had the president's body. They had the magic bullet. They had Air Force One. They had the autopsy photos and x-rays. Here's what I always tell people. If there was a conspiracy, it's absolutely impossible, underline that word, impossible, for some members of the Secret Service to have not been involved. In other words, there's a conspiracy. You have a couple bad apples. And I even name them in my book. I have no qualms about it. Bill Greer was the driver of the president's limousine. Even people like Gerald Ford and Vince Bugliosi said he's the reason why the success of the assassination happened. He slowed the car down. And when I discovered again, for years people saw, Bill Greer, it seems like he slows the car down. But what people don't realize, he looked back twice. It's all a sequence of events. The first shot or shots rings out, and Kennedy's reacting to the throat wound. All the doctors said he would have lived at that point. In fact, he even would have been able to speak as well. So he said he would have been able to perform his normal functions and would have been able to recover. Well, Greer looks back again, and Roy Kellerman, the sequence of events is so crucial. Roy Kellerman yells in his ear, "Get out of line, we've been hit." And Kellerman goes for the radio microphone. Greer disobeys a direct order from the superior, turns around a second time, staring at Kennedy until a fatal shot makes his mark. Only then does he face forward. Only then does he hit the gas when everything's over. He lies about it under oath to the Warren Commission. And he also, to the FBI, seems to implicitly blame the president for the lack of speed. Said, well, we try to keep the cars moving fast, but the president many times ordered us to slow down. It's this old blame the victim crap. Kennedy's dead now. Let's blame him for everything, even the speed of the car. And I always tell people, imagine a loved one, God forbid, it's only hypothetical, but you're driving, relatively slow, and you see a loved one's panicking in the back there. Obviously, you've been threatened from something outside. You're not even a Secret Service agent. Aren't you going to hit the gas? Aren't you going to swerve? Aren't you going to do something, my God? And especially when the guy in front of the seat's yelling at you is superior to get out of line, we've been hit. But Roy Kellerman, buried in a footnote in a very massive book, The Death of a President, he interviewed Roy Kellerman in 1964. Roy Kellerman died in 1984. Roy Kellerman said, Greer then looked in the back of the car. Maybe he didn't believe me. That's pretty devastating right there. Roy Kellerman's even laying Greer out, throwing him under the bus. Everyone does it. So Greer's one of my suspects. My other two I only have 3 suspects in the Secret Service. 95% of these guys are squeaky clean. They were just following orders or they were negligent. But the guys across the line were Bill Greer, Emory Roberts, and Floyd Mooring. Emory Roberts, briefly, was the command of the agents of the follow-up car. He was the guy that, basically said yay or nay to you jumping forward and trying to do something to this man. He shouted no alarm, no alert. He ordered men not to move when the shooting began. He even recalled 2 agents in Love Field, the beginning of the motorcade. For you listeners out there, it's pretty famous, and you're talking to the person, listening to the person who discovered this video in 1991. of Love Field. The agent, it looks like he's thrown his hands 3 times in disgust. He's being recalled from the limousine. He's walking with the motorcade at the beginning of the Dallas motorcade. I discovered that in 1991. That's Donald Lawton, who's walking with the car. Emory Roberts rises in his seat and uses hand gestures. Now, we can't hear the audio because it's voiceover by WFAA TV, but obviously he's telling him to cease and desist. Don Lawton stands there 3 times and raises his hand in disgust, like, what is going on? What's wrong? And there you go. And another agent, Henry Ribka, was also recalled from Love Field. So there's 2 agents that could have been protecting Kennedy rather than motorcade. Various excuses for that in time. You read the book because it's too complicated to get into, but there you go. The final suspect is Floyd Boring. Floyd Boring was the assistant special agent in charge of the White House detail, was not actually in Texas, but he's in charge of planning the Texas trip from the Secret Service point of view. He's the one, he is the genesis of the JFK did not want us on the back of the car myth. He's the one, again, who gave out assignments. He's the one who told them to do things, not do things. So the buck stops specifically with Floyd Boring. All 3 gentlemen are dead now. I did speak to Floyd Boring several times. Ironically, Floyd Boring joined his colleagues in saying that Kennedy never ordered him off the car. He was a very nice man. I guess he didn't realize that Floyd, he said something else a few decades ago, but I wasn't going to rock the boat. As a 27-year-old kid at the time, I was just taking what they were saying, and I was trying to bite my lip and not say anything because I don't want to offend these guys. But I was like taking this all in, and I got him on tape. I got him in writing, and that goes against his own, statements. There you go. That's too convoluted to get into in the interest of time. But it's all it took was 3 bad apples to spoil the bunch. The rest of these guys are just following orders, doing what they're doing and whatnot. It's all about compartmentalization. And again, it's about the medical thing. It's all compartmentalization. They had the oath of silence, worried about the pensions, worried about going to Fort Leavenworth, ruining their lives over Kennedy. Kennedy's dead. They're still living. They had lives to go on. And this information didn't come out till years later. And there you go. It's all piecemeal. It's all, people got their own lives to live, their own bills to pay. There's other world crises coming on and whatnot, other things happening, Vietnam War, Watergate, 9/11, turn of the century, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of it, Father Time has been an adversary in some respects. But the sad thing is a lot of good information's out there, best it's been in years. Some of those books the last 15 years are the best there's ever been. The level of scholarship has been outstanding. But got to realize it's 50-some years later and life goes on and there's generations that didn't even know Kennedy. And it's sad. They won. If it was a conspiracy, I'm pretty sure it was. They got away with it. And all we can do is lay down to the best of our ability the truth. And that's what I want to do. And what I want to do with these 2 living, breathing agents that are out there now, former agents smiling, going around book tours around the world, making literally, this is not hyperbole, literally hundreds of thousands, not millions of dollars off their books. I want to make sure that Kennedy doesn't turn around in his grave again, being blamed for his own security. And I would make damn sure my books that verdict is never out there as a statement of fact. Oh, Kennedy didn't want them on the back of the car. Kennedy didn't want the bubble top. Kennedy didn't want motorcycles beside the car. And that's what my work's been about. It's been this warfare. That's good. It's a current event. These guys are still coming out with books. Got another book coming out in May by Clint Hill called 5 Presidents. And I'm sure he's going to have another chapter on Kennedy. I'm sure for the 3rd time he's going to blame Kennedy for his own lack of security. It's bunk. But this guy is on the biggest publisher in the world. He's going to be on all the TV shows. Everyone's going to believe him because Clint Hill's like a deity. Oh, he can't be wrong. This whole Clint Hill. Anytime Clint Hill was drinking the night before, he didn't actually protect President Kennedy. He was a Jackie agent. He gets in the car when everything's over. It's just a false hero thing. It's like Jessica Lynch during the Iraq War. It's false hero. It's crap. But again, it's like, oh, we love our heroes. Clint Hill, he tried to do something, darn it. Meantime, again, he's drinking the night before. He should have been, as grounds for removal of service, he's one of 9 agents drinking the night before. And yet he's denigrating the guys in Cartagena, Colombia in 2012. He's on CNN, all these shows saying it was idiotic what these guys did. These 9 guys, ironically, it was 9 agents again, too. That's ironic. He said these 9 guys should be thrown out of service, disciplined. It's like, hello, Clint. You actually cost the president's life by drinking the night before. They gave you an award. They gave you promotions. You're out there touring the world with your best-selling books, making millions. How can you sleep at night? But people believe it. There's people that have hero awards. It's like, oh, Clint Hill, oh, he's so wonderful. It's like, he is? What did he do? What did he do? Check out the Zapruder film. Be brutally honest, like Trump, your old sound bites about Trump, about the Iraq War, and about Bush was so true. It is what it is. Clint Hill gets in the car when everything's over. He doesn't even touch Jackie. Jackie gets in and out of her own volition. Everything's over at that point. What did he do? He attempted to do something, I guess. In World War II, did we give medals for attempts? Well, his men were blown away, but let's give him a Bronze Star. He attempted to do something, darn it. That's why Clint Hill is a false hero, and he's just made a mess of history of his books, and that's why I'm out there doing what I'm doing with my books to try to correct history. So there you go.
Okay, so can you give me another half hour? Because I want to ask you about can you give me another half hour?
Sure.
Okay, because I wanted to ask you about because you mentioned the body had to have been tampered with.
Yes, it was. I agree.
Okay, so let's take a break now. When we get back, we'll get into it. And two, how much partying was there the night before? Because the Secret Service has because I was involved in that Carnegie, the Columbian congressional.
There was a lot of it.
Yeah. It's crazy.
The president gets his head blown off, and yet these guys were decorated. 2 guys were decorated. There was no punishment whatsoever. It's disgusting. Yeah.
Yeah, and even current at the Utah what's that thing called, the Olympics?
Yeah,
they were having parties with high school girls, giving alcohol to high school. Nothing happens.
Yeah, the president gets his head blown off, and Clint Hill becomes his false hero for decades. Oh, Clint Hill's so wonderful. Meantime, he's an old drunk to this day. He hasn't done anything. I mean, it is what it is. It's a sad truth, but it is. He knows. That's why he drinks. That's why he never accepted that award, even though he received the award. He didn't accept it in his heart because he knows. He knows that he was a failure. But I also know as in late life, he doesn't mind that old paychecks coming for his book, does he? There you go.
Now, do you think they're writing these books themselves, or they have ghostwriters come in and write it for them?
Oh, they have a ghostwriter. Her name's Lisa McCubbin. She's the co-author of all the books. And we can get into that. And this is all factual. It's not liable. It's all based on internet stuff. So like, oh, Vince, you're going on a limb here saying this stuff. No. It is what it is.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that. The ghostwriter, because that would seem to be a thread. Okay, that would seem to be a point.
Do you want it now or after commercial? Or
well, we got 3 minutes before the commercial. Can you fit it in
very
there?
Briefly then.
Yeah.
Again, it's all factual. Lisa McCubbin, it's what it is. Clint Hill's 84, and she just turned 50, and she still looks like she's in her 40s. They are now a couple, and I want to stress this now for people. This is not TMZ gossip stuff. This is based on factual articles written by the people of the Irish Times. When no one's disputing, like, oh, Vince, you're getting off the deep end now. Let's don't get it. No, it's on. They are a couple. And you might say, okay, Vince, beyond the fact there's a big age difference, what does that have to do about Kennedy? Please, what it has to do with, it's an old man being influenced by a lady that I think, quite frankly, like I put this nicely, I think is using Clint and using him all the way to the bank. His books have been on the number one. Simon Schuster's biggest company in the world, let's face it. And his books have been huge bestsellers. When you say a book has sold 200,000 copies, 200,000 times $25, even with a royalty, he's made a mint. And he's had 3 books, and he has a 4th one coming on now. I include the Kennedy deal because he wrote the foreword to that, and he also did the book tour. So that's actually his book with Gerald Blaine. So there's another book coming on now. He has a movie deal in the works about Jackie, so he's making big cha-ching money there too. And again, it's blaming Kennedy. It's saying Oswald had to alone get a life. It's changing his testimony. All these years he said one thing. Now he's changed his testimony about the medical evidence at this very late date. It's all because he's trying to make himself look good to history. He's trying to impress his girlfriend co-author, who's like about 30-some years young. His sons are older than Lisa McCubbin. But again, this is all factual. It's not like TMZ or I'm getting into gossip. It is what it is. You want to see what the influence is? I think it's an old man being very much influenced by his co-author. I'm very suspicious of. I can't prove anything about her motives. I'll just say this. Very interesting, I discovered recently. There was a John McCubbin from the same Maryland, Virginia area who was the captain of the White House police. That name is very unusual, and she also heralds from the Virginia, Maryland area. I don't know if that's an influence on her way she thinks or whatnot. She also interviewed President Bush before 9/11. She was stationed in Qatar. I think that's how you pronounce it, Qatar. And lo and behold, she comes to Virginia. She meets Clint Hill. They fall in love. They're writing books. They're touring the world. They're doing TV shows. And all of a sudden, he's changed his testimony and blaming Kennedy. And it's just ridiculous. But it's a current event. It's not something from the past. When these guys are living and breathing, making best-selling books, and they're lying, somebody has to step up to the plate. And it's little old me. There's no one else doing it. It wasn't for me. No one else. They'd win. And maybe my books don't sell in the neighborhood of a Simon Schuster book, but it's getting out there. It's doing good, and the internet's good. It's definitely helping between the internet and my books. It's definitely getting the word out there. And it's part and parcel. Look at the Amazon reviews. People are saying, Vince, and there's people I do not know either, by the way. It's not plants. They're saying, Vince Palamara said something totally different in his book. So thank God the word's getting out there. They're realizing that Kennedy didn't order them off the car. This is bull. Didn't order the motorcycles away. This is all bunk just to lay the blame onto Kennedy because he can't defend himself. And it's obscene to me. It's the worst kind of assassination. He's been shot 3 times in Dallas in questioning his character and now questioning him for blaming himself for his own assassination. pretty obscene. But there you go.
Okay, great. Let's take a commercial break now. When I come back, I want to ask you about where was the body tampered with and who did it? Because if you're saying there's only like 3 smelly agents there, if they're tampering with the body, there got to be more 3 guys involved. And
Right.
And the other thing too is McCoven. Have you ever done any searches? Because you can do like combined residence searches to find out if 2 people ever lived at the same addresses.
Yeah, they have, and she ordered it taken down. Somebody on the education forum did a big long expose about intelligence backgrounds of her father, and she ordered it taken down. So they took the whole thread down. An education forum must have struck too close to home about her daddy and that. So, yeah.
Okay, I got you. You're saying like you only found 3 bad apples, okay, that you can point your finger at with confidence. But now, if they're altering the body, okay, it had to be more than 3 guys, right?
Well, like I said, I made the analogy. There's guys that are bad apples across the line. There's other guys just following orders. Someone could quickly say, well, Vince, weren't the SS guards in World War II following orders too? You wouldn't exactly call them squeaky clean. So it's a nebulous. There's nothing's black and white. There's all shades of gray. I mean, let's put it this way. David Lifton's landmark book, Best Evidence, talking about the body being altered, was pretty radical. A lot of people believe it. There's people think it's too fantastic. I can't wrap my head around it. Well, bottom line is, if something was done to the president's body, and a lot of people begrudgingly believe it was because the evidence is there, it had to have been done. It wasn't done at Parkland Hospital. There's just no evidence. There's just no way. I won't get interested in time. Trust me, even David Lifton said nothing happened at Parkland. It happened to have the body had to have been taken away either sometime on Air Force One, or it was actually done at Bethesda. And the Secret Service had the body. They're the ones who carried the official casket onto Air Force One. This is important now. When the swearing in of LBJ, unnecessary swearing in by Constitution, he was already the president. There was a song and dance. He didn't need to do the oath of office. It was stupid. He was already president. Once Kennedy was officially dead, even when Kennedy was incapacitated, he was president. But anyway, and many people think it's a ruse to get people out of the way so the body could have been taken out of the coffin and whatnot. There was a specific agent back there, Richard Johnson, the keeper of the magic bullet, by the way, the agent who had the magic bullet, Richard Johnson, at Parkland Hospital. Lo and behold, he's also standing guard of the Kennedy's body when the LBJ's taking the oath of office. So there's a specific name for you. I always go to specific names and evidence in my book. I don't go not the ghosts and goblins of the grassy knoll. We actually have actual names and documentation. Well, he's one of them. If you want to say somebody besides the 3 agents who could have crossed the line, or at least was following orders of a sinister nature, Richard Johnson, he's a prime candidate right there. But there were other ones as well. They were on Air Force One, and I name them in my book and whatnot. Well, keep in mind, now, if something happened to Air Force One, or you could say, okay, somehow, some way, that body was not tampered with at Air Force One. The only problem is, and people have to read the book. They have to read Best Evidence by David Lifton, and they also have to read Doug Horne's 5-part book, Inside the ARB, and even In the Eye of History by William Law. Whether we want to admit it, evidence is there whether we like it or not. And the bottom line is, there's too many people saying there was decoy ambulances at Bethesda, too many people talking about different types of caskets, talking about body bags, talking about changing wounds. To say this was all mistaken. And especially when you realize that some of these guys believe Oswald acted alone and they're still saying this, that really speaks volumes of their veracity, especially when they were contacted at a time that people didn't know anything about any controversy whatsoever about the body. Very important. Well, then the next step is, if it was not taken at Air Force One, I'm kind of 50-50 about that, if that's a possibility, then the alterations had to have been done at Bethesda. Doug Horne of the ARB, who does books I'd mentioned, Inside the ARB, makes a very good case for something being done at Bethesda, an off-the-record inspection pre-autopsy. And what that means is the body somehow, some way, made its way to Bethesda, either by helicopter or in the official casket or some way, somehow. And they cleared the room, the official room of the autopsy, and people were left to go in the ante-room, the room off to the left or whatnot, for the purposes of this discussion. Some were off to the autopsy room, while the cover story was, well, we're doing x-rays and whatnot, and we don't want the x-rays, could be dangerous radioactivity. We got to clear the room. And while they cleared the room, wounds were enlarged for national security reasons, whatnot. They're digging for the real bullet fragments, a bullet fragment, whatnot, and they're digging around. And see, it's not precise surgery like some sort of science fiction movie. What it was very imprecise. That's why we have evidence. That's why it was very terrible. The wounds changed because just by virtue of the fact that they were digging around it, the wound went from being smaller to being larger, being more ambiguous. And then the official autopsy began later on, I think around 8:15 or so. But the body was already there for a while. So what were they doing? And we actually have evidence in Doug Horne's book. He actually names a couple of people that talk about, yeah, I saw like Dr. Hughes working with a saw on the head and whatnot. But when he's saying that, it was at a time that the autopsy didn't begin. What is Humes doing with the saw? Obviously, there's surgical saws used in autopsy, not to be gory, but that's how they open the head, the skull cap to get to the brain. But he's doing it at a time when the autopsy didn't even begin. This guy's just innocently talking about his recollections. You know, it was only 15 years later at the time he said it to the House Select Committee. And again, those documents only came out in the late 1990s. Only researchers who have any interest in this would look these documents up. Well, and there was another witness, too, that talked about it looked like some sort of ball-peen hammer or something was taken to Kennedy's head before the autopsy began. Again, this is all based on actual witness statements, not based on theories or authors out to make a buck, all this silly stuff. Meantime, I'm working for a living full-time. You know, I'm not making up, to put them out, I'm not getting rich off my books, folks. I have a life, I have a wife, I have other interests. I'm in it for the truth, not for money. Trust me, it's a farce in my mind. I worked many years for free on my own dime, so we're not in this for fame and glory. Leave that for people like Clint Hill, who've been on Fox News, CNN, Discovery Channel, and all that. Regular people like us that have lives and jobs and making a modest income, we're in it for the truth. But anyway, to get on the subject here, yeah, I think that the most likely candidate happened at Bethesda before the official autopsy began, and it was done basically under orders. And, you know, we had admirals and generals. These guys were just lowly captains with the autopsy doctors. Pierre Fink, by the way, importantly, was not even there yet. So it was down to Hughes and Boswell. The third autopsy doctor didn't even get there yet. No one disputes that. So it's just two little old doctors there following orders, and those orders are for life. Just like some people say they take secrets of the government to the grave. Well, when you're under orders, you're not going to question orders, whether in your private mind you might be thinking, what are we doing here, gentlemen? This isn't right. They're going to, yes, sir. You want me to do this? Yes, sir. And they're going to do it. And people said the gallery was filled with admirals and generals. Pierre Fink, under oath to Jim Garrison, said, yeah, there were many admirals and generals in the room. And oh, yes, when you're a lieutenant colonel in the Army, you only follow orders. He even admitted that's why they didn't probe the neck wound. And as we know, there's much controversy about the neck wound because the Parkland people said that it was a wound of entrance. They get to Bethesda. They don't even appreciate it's a bullet wound. They think it's only a lowly tracheotomy. They didn't even find out until the body left Bethesda that, oh, my God, people, that was a bullet wound. They found out by a call from Dr. Malcolm Perry from Parkland, we missed a bullet. So what happens? They missed a bullet. They also didn't know at Parkland there was a bullet hole in his back, not in the back of the neck, in his back. How can a bullet in the back go through the neck from behind at a steep angle? Can't be done. That's why Gerald Ford even admitted in 1998 he's the one who made the change. In the original notes for the Warren Report, it said the wound hit the back and then came out the neck. And obviously you'd say to yourself, wait a minute, something's wrong. He changed it. Verbal plastic surgery, they called it. He said it was the back of the neck in his handwriting, and he was called to the carpet about it in 1998. He said, well, it was just for reasons of clarification. It wasn't for a conspiracy theory, damn it. But people realize, wait a minute, a former president of the United States, remember the Warren Commission? He benefited, by the way, obviously, so did our inspector. And they're both, the genesis of the single bullet theory was Specter and Ford. They're changing by verbal plastic surgery, by verbal description. They move the wound up, not by scientific evidence, by just crossing it on. It goes from back to neck. That's why you have such incompetence and such confusion. Again, the medical evidence is the most important aspect of this case. It's not about theories and boogeyman on the grassy knoll and Rorschach tests of what we think we see in a photograph. And
oh, yeah, that stuff is crazy.
And we can go on forever about it. It's important to a point, but the point is that the medical evidence, anybody watches CSI Criminal Minds, all it shows knows the medical evidence is the most important thing. It doesn't tell you that. So when you get down to the majority of people believing that something happened, and to answer your point directly, what I think happened, is I do think the body was tampered with. It's probably given a national security cover. They're looking for fragments and whatnot. We can't let the world know we're a banana republic. It appears there was another shooter men, but that's not what we're going to say. We have 3 bullets. That's all we're willing to say. We have a gentleman in custody now, Lee Harvey Oswald. That's the story we're going with. We can't let people know we live in a banana republic. We can't know, God forbid, there might have been some element of this. So, gentlemen, this is what we have to find. The autopsy even begins. No autopsy. Everybody has criticized this, and this is ridiculous. The autopsy begins quoting, I think it's the New York Times and New York Herald Tribune, saying that according to the news reports, 3 shots were fired from the school book depository to the rear of the decedent. It's like, wait a minute. You don't do that. You just go off what you see on the body, not on news reports. It was like it was already given to them predisposed. We have 3 shots from the rear, a guy in custody now. Keep in mind, Lee Harvey Oswald is still living and breathing. There was going to be a trial. Jack Ruby didn't strike yet. And you got to find what you got to find. And they did what they did. And who, especially 1964, it's still hard to believe now. Who would have believed the body was tampered with back then? 0.0, nobody, especially when there's gag orders and orders of, suffer military consequences and whatnot. They're going to do what they're going to do.
Let me ask you about this.
Because David Lifton, people like that, we know, yeah.
This bullet wound to the back, when would there be an opportunity for there to be a bullet wound to the back? That's $64 million question. How there would have been is, I think most people that are looking to say there's no doubt there's shots in the rear. The bad news is there's no doubt there was shots in the front as well. He was hitting the crossfire, and this part might not exactly be original research, but I think everybody who's looked at the case objectively said there's definitely shots in the front and the rear. If Oswald was a shooter, in the interest of time, we can't get into that. Let's just say hypothetically he was a shooter. He certainly wasn't the shooter. He wasn't the shooter who gave the coup de grace, the headshot either, by the way. So we got 2 shots, but he laid it all on one man. And there's no doubt he was shot in the back because we have the autopsy photos and x-rays. We have the president's suit jacket, his shirts. We have eyewitness observations that the bullet wound in the back. It's a landslide of evidence that he was shot from the back. It was only this verbal plastic surgery later on trying to move it upwards, so desperate to move it to the back of the neck, not to the back, because they realized, oh my God, we have a downward trajectory, a steep downward trajectory. How in God's name, it would have hit his heart or his lungs. And by the way, they said that the lung was bruised, the pleural area. It was like a smoking gun that, it looks like the bullet did. It was like a bad round, what they call it. It's very often hunters will say there's bad rounds. You shoot not every bullet goes through like you see in movies. Sometimes it's a short shot. It's a bad round. And probably what happened was the wound that Kennedy's reacting to before the fatal headshot was the wound that hit him in the back. It was like a terrible punch in the back, so to speak, because sometimes you don't feel that excruciating pain right away. You're numb by like a body blow, like a punch. So he was hit in the back. Then he was hit in the neck after a separate shot. Connolly was hit by another shot. Then the fatal headshot made its mark. And then it was also the missed shot, James Tague, who was a fly in the ointment to the commission. They had to concede that there was a shot that totally missed the motorcade. But there you go. And that's the conundrum we've been dealing with so many times. People get so lost in theories about who did it, they don't realize that the evidence is there, persuasive evidence of the conspiracy, just based on the medical evidence and whatnot, and the stripping of President Kennedy's security. But yeah, as far as the back wound doesn't line up the neck wound. Everybody says the back wound was too low for the neck wound. Even if you believe the neck wound was an exit wound, which wasn't the totality of the evidence, that neck wound from the front was an entrance wound. He was hit from the front of the neck. That back wound had nothing to do with that wound. In fact, even Paul O'Connor, people from the autopsy, said the back wound didn't even go through the pleural cavity. It stopped. It stopped after a couple inches. In fact, the FBI agents wrote a report and said, yeah, Dr. Hume said the end of the opening could be felt with my finger. They were actually digging in there, morbid as it sounds, with their own fingers. And he said it didn't go anywhere. But then, obviously, when they testified the Warren Commission, we got to change our tune because Oswald acted alone. Yeah, we've been told that we went through. See what I mean? It's all about the context of the time. When Oswald was captured, if you even see the raw, I have a lot of the raw footage of that day, ABC, NBC, CBS. The first news reports are tantalizing. They're saying shots came from the knoll. He was shot from the front. He was shot in the right temple, all this. But then when they captured little old Lee Harvey Oswald, who, by the way, was the first assassin in world history to adamantly deny, never was proud, I did it because this man was an enemy of the working people. No, he adamantly denied shooting the president. He's also the first one to ever use a rifle instead of a pistol. That's another story in itself. But when it became Oswald, everything changed. In fact, there's actually a reporter who slipped out something for the whole world saying, originally we thought the shots came from this overpass, but now it appears somehow or other he was shot from behind, but then we have reports he was shot in the right temple, and it's Frank Ryan. His face is making all these grimaces because he's realized, this doesn't make any sense. Wait. It went from the front to the behind. It went from behind, and he was shot from the right temple. And he's confused. It's funny seeing him grapple with it on live TV. He's even saying, you can even tell his visceral reaction is, folks, this doesn't make any sense. But again, people weren't investigative reporters back then. People were grieving. My mom and dad were crying their eyes out. All the details got washed away in tears
they weren't investigating it decades later and analyzing every little nook and cranny of everything. It is what it is. And now, if the assassination like that happened now, people are so skeptical. You have the internet, you have investigative reporters, everybody mistrusts the government. They couldn't get away with it. But back then, we were ripe for the taking. That's why we believed in Gulf Tonkin crap about getting into Vietnam. Oh, we fired on us. No truth to that whatsoever. The real reasons about Watergate, on and on and on. And not everything is conspiracy. I know those people sees conspiracies in my sleep. I'd probably shock people about some things that are like sacred cows of conspiracy. I do not believe are conspiracy. So I'm pretty level-headed with this, I would say. But
we'll take a look.
Let's go with the evidence. There's no evidence there, then I'd get a life. I mean, if Gerald Bain, way back on September 27th, would have told me, 92, would have told me, Vince, President Kennedy ordered us off the car. Even if he was lying to me, that would have been the end of my research, folks. No book. He's telling me it's true. Well, time to move on, gentlemen. But he told me something categorically against vicious history. And this guy, again, was General MacArthur of the Secret Service, not a buck private in the nursing home, all senile. Oh, no. He was very lucid, and all his colleagues and even White House aides who had no dog in the hunt were telling me the same thing. It's pretty much a landslide, folks, that something's amiss. And it was only through my own original research did this stuff come out. But I didn't want to believe other people. I was skeptical. It's unsatisfying when you read a book. I want more. I want to corroborate this. And that's what I wanted to do. And that's why I had to go on the journey of writing books, because it was never enough to just believe somebody else. I wanted to do my own thinking. And, yeah.
Well, Vince, we're down to the last couple of minutes. Why don't you tell people, first of all, if there's anything you think we left out.
I know, right? Save everything with kitchen sink. Trust me, folks, there's a lot more in the books. Just need time, and I discovered some of the major discoveries. But my first book, Survivor's Guild, has a lot. And basically, to sum it up in a very short amount of time, the first book, Survivor's Guild, lays the onus of the lack of protection on the Secret Service where it belongs. That if they would have did their proper professional job, as they did during FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and early Kennedy days, Kennedy lives, whether there's a conspiracy or no conspiracy. My second book, JFK from Parkland, Bethesda, massively documents the medical evidence in the case and shows overwhelmingly it was a conspiracy, or all these people from Parkland and Bethesda are lying. And I'm being facetious here. They're lying for no monetary gain whatsoever. So all these people were in a conspiracy to lie about the wounds. There you go. So I think the book's overwhelming about that as far as showing conspiracy. The third book I got coming out next year, The Not So Secret Service, Agency Tales from FDR to the Kennedy assassination to the Reagan era. Definitely, obviously, by including the Kennedy assassination, has some important chapters, some follow-up things that came out after publication of the first book that were too important to not corroborate and go into. So there's some very important corroborative data in the new book coming out next year, but it also covers the Secret Service and their interaction with FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and other presidents up to Reagan. And it shows some very interesting things. You can make analogies to Dallas, what did and did not happen. But it also goes into other things not having to do with the assassination, just, some very interesting anecdotes about presidents and how they interacted with the Secret Service and vice versa. And it's not the Ron Kessler tabloid stuff either. He covered that pretty well. This is stuff that has to do with protection or lack thereof. And, implicit in all my work is definitely comparing things to Dallas. I won't lie about that, but there's definitely information about the other presidents I think people will find fascinating. People find fascinating that several core members of Kennedy's detail were there for Truman, Eisenhower, and were there for FDR, Truman, and Eisenhower, I should say, and also protected Truman during his assassination attempt. So these gentlemen in Dallas, some of these guys were veterans of assassination attempts and of presidents before. They weren't these green rookies out there. They knew better. And we'll also see some of the interaction of presidents, LBJ through and including Reagan. I didn't want to get too modern after that. My interest kind of stops in the Reagan days. And I got some very important information from Robert DeProspero I mentioned very early on. He was the head of Reagan's detail, who's become a big fan of my work. I got some interesting information on him. Little things we take for granted, like whenever presidents come to town, we all have to pass through magnetometers. It was Robert DeProspero's idea. He pulled over on the side of the road. He was a he was a high school professor, a high school teacher, I should say, in West Virginia when the assassination happened. He pulled over the side of the road and cried for the first time. He decided to become an agent. He wanted to be a good agent, make sure that never happened again. Because of him, we go through magnetometers. Because of him, there's an agent at all hospitals whenever the president comes to town. So much more. So there's a lot of interesting analogies to Dallas, what did not happen, improvements they made, but there's some really important corroborating data. And I feel like I'm alone in the wilderness. Other than Ron Kessler, who has a lot of government connections and wrote a book that's basically tabloid trash about the Secret Service, and a couple agency memoirs that have been obviously censored. They're not going to say anything dirty or controversial. My book's out there, I think, showing all the good, the bad, and the ugly out there. And I think it's interesting because it's definitely a contrast to history. And I always stress this to people. I would have no book if these gentlemen would have told me what they told me. It comes from them. It's not like, oh, it came from you, your theories, you're trying to, twist things. No, They told me something went against official history. Again, if these gentlemen would have told me something else, even if they were lying, I would have believed it and would have moved on. Everything's compartmentalized. When people, maybe when they get older, maybe when they're not thinking about their lives anymore, their pensions are protected now. Hello, they're retired, they're civilians. The truth comes easier to the lips. And they're thinking some little whippersnapper, some 26, 27-year-old kid at the time from Pennsylvania calling me. By the way, I've stressed at the time, I didn't know I was ever coming out with a book. In fact, until Trying Day came along, I never thought I would have a book. I tried to get my book published, and I got this over and over again. Oh, your book's very good, blah, blah, blah. And so many words, they didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Too controversial. You're talking about the Secret Service. Oh, come on, you're casting aspersions on the agency. No. So it took the courage of Trying Day to come out with my books because, it is a controversial thing. And again, I'm a big fan of the Secret Service, and I think you'll see that in the new book. It's just I'm a big critic of November 22nd because I think the president should not have died that day. And that's not Monday morning quarterbacking either. That's just based on a precedent. It's not looking at rose-colored glasses of security today. That's shooting fish in a barrel. Obviously, by today's standards, Kennedy would have lived. I'm talking about security measures invoked just from FDR to early 63. Kennedy should have lived.
Okay, Vince, we're out of time, brother. But listen, okay. You're a great guest, man. Great guest. Thanks, man. I definitely got to have you back. Okay, thank you so much, okay?
Sounds good, man.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, Vince Palamara. Excellent stuff. We're going to have him back, hopefully maybe on a Saturday afternoon, too. Vince Palamara, blogspot.com, and YouTube channel is Vince Palamara. And you can find all of his books on the Opperman Report bookstore. Good night.